So how exactly does Gojo's teleportation work? Let's talk about it. So I was asked this question in reference to this moment here, where Gojo goes and retrieves Yuji and warps them both back to Jogo so that he can teach him some things, right? And Gojo uses the word warp, and Yuji's like, what is he talking about? So I was asked if this warp that Gojo did is the same thing as when he teleports. And yes, in my opinion, but there is some nuance to how Gojo uses this ability, so let's just break it all down. So first things first, and not that anyone was going to fight me on this, but Gojo can indeed teleport. Here he is talking about it in Hidden Inventory after his awakening, saying that he wants to practice his domain and also long-distance teleportation techniques. And so fast forward from Hidden Inventory, and clearly he's figured it out, right? Now that one line in Hidden Inventory is basically the only time we've gotten any description of how this works. Like a lot of things in JJK, we have to read between the lines to figure out the actual mechanics of this thing. So first and foremost, I want to point out that Gojo does a hand sign every time we see him teleport. Now, could he feasibly do it without the hand sign? I'm not going to say it's impossible, maybe with a binding vow or maybe under certain circumstances, sure. But every time we see him do a substantial teleport, he does this hand sign. Another important note is that Gojo can bring people with him when he teleports, like we see here with Yuji. And to go a step beyond that, in Jujutsu Kaisen 0, we also see that Gojo is capable of teleporting other people even when he himself is not teleporting. And you can see that he's doing the hand sign here, but in addition to that, he has drawn some Jujutsu seals to make this possible. So I'm assuming you need some extra steps like that when Gojo himself is not going to be doing the teleporting. Okay, so he's got to make the hand signs, he can bring people along if he wants, but how exactly is he teleporting? Because his curse technique is not teleportation, it's limitless, right? So Gojo is effectively manipulating infinity to emulate a teleport. So I'm not going to get into the weeds on fully breaking down how the limitless technique works in this video, so I'm going to try to be brief here. But Gojo can manipulate infinity, right? And he can basically do that in two ways, with his blue and with his red. Now, the blue basically contracts space, creating a negative infinity, if you will. Gojo uses the example of -1 apples. And the effect of that is an attractive force, because you could think of it as the universe trying to compensate for that negative infinity Gojo created, and it sucks everything toward it, like blue, right? And then the opposite of that is red, which repels everything away. So Gojo can literally fold space in a way. If he knows that, hey, I want to go 10 feet over there, he can manipulate this negative infinity, this blue, to attract him 10 feet over there. Okay, so I'm going to try not to get lost in semantics here, but stay with me. When you think of like a typical teleportation ability, right? You think just poof and you show up where you want to, right? That's not how Gojo's works. Gojo has to do like logistical calculations in his mind to figure out how to navigate the infinite space to put him where he wants to be. And we know that because of how he talks about practicing it in this Hidden Inventory moment. He says we need to plot out a course to the school that doesn't have obstacles, meaning Gojo has to know like the actual path his teleportation is going to take in order to execute it, right? He has to know exactly how to logistically map out these infinite distances, to retract and expand space as necessary to get him where he needs to go. So this is like, galaxy brain level of calculations here. Now, I'm not saying he's like a mathematical genius, but I think this is another tally in the mark for why you need the six eyes to use limitless, functionally, basically. It's because of what those eyes allow him to calculate and see that he can perform these types of teleportations. So to try to put that in a bit of a nicer nutshell, Gojo's teleportation is not a dematerialize, rematerialize where I want. It's a no, I'm going to literally warp the space around me to end up where I want. And to be able to do that, you're going to have to understand the calculations necessary, right? So that is how his limitless and his six eyes are allowing him to do this, in my opinion. Before anybody yells at me in the comments, I know in the anime it shows it as if they are dematerializing, rematerializing, but I think that's just a product of the visual medium, right? Show, not tell. It would be almost impossible to visually show the type of teleportation that I'm talking about, but I think it's the only thing that makes sense given Gojo's ability. And finally, I want to give a shout out to User for sponsoring this video. I hope my explanation helped, but User also had a couple of follow-up questions. The first being, what is the maximum distance Gojo could teleport? And that's hard to say because we've seen him teleport some pretty big distances. So conceptually, I would think that there isn't a limit considering he can literally manipulate infinity. But I think the limit would come in the form of what he could calculate, if you will, and what obstacles may or may not be in the path of any given teleportation. So, yeah, I wouldn't say that, it's capped on 5 miles or anything like that. And then the other question was, can other sorcerers and curse users do this? And no, which I think should make sense based on the video, right? He can only do this thanks to the limitless. So other sorcerers could do this if they had techniques that similarly allowed them to warp space somehow. But no, not just any jujutsu practitioner could do this. And that's going to do it for this one, y'all. Just be sure to teleport yourself over to the Discord. Hell of a plug.